The book we are going to discuss in this episode is called Thinking, Fast and Slow. From the title, it's not hard to see that this is a book about thinking. In our daily lives, the most common things we do are thinking, judging, and making decisions. But did you know? We often believe that we can control our thoughts, but in reality, we frequently make irrational decisions. This book teaches us the fundamental principles of how our brain works and helps us make wise choices. The author of this book is called Daniel Kahneman. He is a professor at Princeton University in the United States and won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. It's quite interesting because the author is a psychologist, and the book we are going to talk about in this episode is a genuine psychology book. So it's strange how an outsider in economics like him could win the Nobel Prize in Economics. Simply put, it's because his research went beyond the scope of psychology and influenced the way economists think. Anyone familiar with economics knows that there is a fundamental assumption in economics, which is that every individual engaged in economic behavior is rational, striving to obtain maximum economic benefits at the minimum economic cost. However, Daniel Kahneman discovered that in real life, people are not always rational and often make irrational decisions. For example, there are two sets of tableware, one with 5 plates in perfect condition and the other with 6 plates, one of which is broken. In the eyes of a rational person, the prices of these two sets of tableware should be the same. However, in reality, people are willing to pay much less for the latter set simply because the broken plate makes them uncomfortable. There are many examples like this. His ideas have gone beyond the scope of psychology and have had a profound impact on economics. The book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, focuses on showcasing the essence of Daniel Kahneman's thoughts. The Economist even compares the content of this book to Darwin's theory of evolution and Copernicus' heliocentrism. In this book, he uses rigorous academic language to present us with a fascinating world of thinking. Today, we will follow the structure of the original book and explain 4 parts. First, what is the distinction between fast and slow thinking? Second, what intuitive flaws are caused by the brain's operating modes? Third, how to avoid these intuitive traps and make rational decisions. Fourth, how to enrich life experiences by utilizing the operational principles of the brain. First, let's take a look at the first question: what is fast and slow thinking? Fast and slow thinking actually refers to the two operating systems of the brain. After years of research, Daniel Kahneman discovered that our brain does not simply follow one set of instructions, but rather has two operating systems that exist simultaneously. He named these two systems System 1 and System 2. System 1 is known as fast thinking, as it operates autonomously and requires little mental effort. For example, we can instantly perceive someone's facial expression or identify a sudden sound. On the other hand, System 2 is known as slow thinking, which involves learning and deep contemplation, requiring more mental effort. The title of the book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, corresponds to these two systems. To gain a more intuitive understanding of these two systems, you can try answering the following thought-provoking question. If the racket and the ball together cost $11, and the racket is $10 more expensive than the ball, how much does the ball cost? If you answer based on intuition, many people will blurt out that the price of the ball is $1. However, if you slow down and calculate carefully, you will realize that this is an incorrect answer. If the ball costs $1, then the racket that is $1 more expensive than the ball would be $11, and the total would be $12, which doesn't match the assumption. The correct answer is that the ball costs 50 cents, and the racket costs $10.50. How about that? Did you catch on? If you answered incorrectly, don't be discouraged, because less than half of the thousands of college students, including those from Harvard University and Princeton University, gave the correct answer. When we instinctively answer a question without much thought, like blurting out that the ball's price is $1, that's System 1 thinking in action. When we start to think carefully or examine that answer, taking out a pen and calculating it seriously, that's when System 2 kicks in. After understanding what System 1 and System 2 are, which operating system do you think we use more often in our daily lives? The answer to this question may surprise many people. Although we all advocate for rationality, the truth is that our brains are primarily wired for quick thinking. Why is that? The key lies in the fact that using our brains consumes a significant amount of energy, and since our energy is limited, we always prioritize using the least amount of effort to solve problems. If we can avoid using our brains, we will. This is almost a universal tendency. From an energy-saving perspective, you will then realize the enormous advantage of System 1. In order to save mental energy in our daily lives, quick thinking allows us to form countless subconscious reactions based on past experiences, simplifying our lives. For example, when we wake up every day, we don't have to think again about how to get dressed, squeeze toothpaste, or take the subway. System 1 has turned these tasks into automatic processes that can be executed with a single click. We also have similar experiences in life, such as when something suddenly flies towards you, you instinctively step back and use your hand to protect vital areas. In addition, System 1 can also perceive some simple relationships in the real world, such as this room seems to be slightly larger than that one, these two children are about the same age, and so on. Apart from sleeping, System 1 is almost always online and cannot be turned off. This determines that System 1 always takes the lead when we deal with things. There is no way to bypass System 1 and let System 2 handle it directly. If System 1 thinks it can handle the problem, then System 2 basically has nothing to do. This is also why we say that humans are fundamentally irrational. Only when we encounter more complex problems, does our System 1 seek help from System 2. Although System 2 is more reliable, this reliability comes at a cost. Compared to System 1, the deliberate System 2 is more like a power-hungry generator that occupies and consumes a large amount of our limited attention. There is a very famous psychology experiment called The Invisible Gorilla that illustrates this phenomenon. It tells the story of a teacher who asks students to watch a video of a football game and count the number of times the players pass the ball. After watching the video, the teacher asks the students if they saw a gorilla in the video. Everyone says they didn't see it. But when the teacher replays the video, the students realize that there was indeed a person dressed as a gorilla dancing in the middle of the field. Why did the students fail to see the gorilla? It's because when the students were using their System 2 thinking, they needed to concentrate their attention and couldn't process other things. Imagine you're leisurely taking a walk outside and suddenly receive a call from your boss. He asks you seriously what you plan to say at tomorrow's meeting. You will find that your steps have gradually slowed down because walking fast would distract you and prevent you from thinking about what your boss asked. Even if you delegate the task to your System 2, if you're mentally fatigued, your System 2 will be interrupted, and the problem will go back to your System 1. The fast-thinking mode will continue to control your behavior. So let's continue discussing the second question, the negative impact brought about by fast thinking, and the intuitive traps triggered by the brain's operating mode. The first trap is called the cognitive relaxation trap, which means that when a person is in an environment that does not require the activation of System 2, it is easier to reach a relaxed state and develop a liking and trust for the things at hand. For example, when you first encounter a colleague who looks fierce, you may initially feel resistant towards them. However, as time goes by, you may realize, hey, this person is actually not bad, and their appearance may not seem so unpleasant anymore. In psychology, this is known as the mere exposure effect. Repeated exposure to something gradually leads to liking it. Cognitive relaxation can make us very careless, perhaps because of the beautiful images in advertisements. We easily open our wallets, negating a valuable business report just because the font is blurry. Investing all our assets in a highly risky stock just because of a friend's recommendation. These practices can all lead to significant losses for us. In addition, when we have experienced a certain low-probability event, we tend to become less vigilant and dismissive when similar things happen again. For example, the author once coincidentally ran into an old friend, John, while on vacation, which surprised him greatly. However, 2 weeks later, he bumped into John again at the cinema, and this time there was no feeling of surprise. This is because John's presence had become ingrained in his mind as someone he would always encounter when going out. This is the illusion that cognitive relaxation brings us, and during this time, System 2 becomes even lazier than usual, so we should be extra cautious. Okay, let's talk about the second trap, the automatic substitution trap. As we mentioned before, System 1 is not very good at solving difficult problems. Moreover, when faced with a difficult problem, System 1 doesn't immediately pass it to System 2. Instead, it substitutes it with another simple question and takes the answer to that question as the answer to the complex problem. For example, when asked if someone is a good person, the respondent may find it difficult to judge, so they substitute the question with something like, "Are they good to me?" Another example is if you were asked how much money you would donate to protect dolphins, you might not have a clear answer. But if you substitute it with, "How angry do you feel when you think about dolphins being hunted?" you might donate a sum of money based on your current emotions. In this way, we unintentionally deceive ourselves and develop biases towards others. Automatic substitution traps have triggered many psychological effects, and the most typical one is stereotyping. Stereotyping refers to our tendency to use typical or partial characteristics to represent the whole. For example, if we see someone with many tattoos, we might assume that they are not good at studying. In other words, these biases are caused by System 1 taking shortcuts and substituting simple answers for complex questions. It is much easier to label someone than to have a comprehensive understanding of them. In addition, the automatic replacement trap can also give rise to a halo effect. The halo effect refers to the tendency to assume that someone is good at everything because of a positive first impression. For example, we may have no knowledge of someone's management skills, but just because we heard them give a brilliant speech once, we think they are highly capable. Or perhaps, after reading a high-quality consulting report, we make a significant investment decision without realizing that we actually have limited information at hand. In general, the automatic substitution trap often leads us to generalize based on personal experience instead of objectively assessing probabilities, resulting in judgment errors or missing out on important opportunities. The brain's third cognitive trap is called the anchoring trap. Let's use an example to help you understand. The author conducted an experiment where he created a number dial from 1 to 100 and asked some students to randomly spin the dial. Of course, the dial was rigged so that the students could only land on two numbers, 10 or 65. Then, these students were asked to estimate the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. The average estimate given by the students who landed on 10 was 25%, while the average estimate given by the students who landed on 65 was 45%. Clearly, the values given by these students were influenced by the previous dial numbers, and this phenomenon is called the anchoring effect. In fact, anchoring traps often appear in our daily lives. For example, there are two breakfast shops that have similar numbers of customers visiting every day. However, when it comes to settling the bill, one shop always has higher sales than the other. Upon investigation, it turns out that the shop with better performance always asks customers whether they want to add one egg or two when taking their orders. On the other hand, the waiter at the other congee shop simply asks whether customers want to add an egg or not. Customers who receive the first question consider how many eggs to add, while those who receive the second question consider whether to add an egg or not. With different considerations, the answers naturally differ. The first breakfast shop unknowingly sells more eggs and increases its sales. This is the power of anchoring. Let's give another example. If a new product is surrounded by high-end goods, it is highly likely that it will be priced high and accepted by consumers. On the contrary, if it is placed in an inconspicuous location alongside cheap products, even if it has outstanding quality and powerful features, it will be difficult to be recognized as a good product. Even we ourselves sometimes pay special attention to who we are seen with in public, because all of this will anchor others' perception of us. Okay, now let's talk about the last trap, the framing trap. This can be seen as an upgraded version of the previous anchoring trap. It means that our System 1 is not very good at distinguishing and only knows what it sees, so objectively, the same problem can lead people to make different decisions if described differently. Let's give an example to illustrate this. There's a joke about a miser who accidentally falls into a river. A kind person standing on the bank shouts, "Give me your hand, I'll pull you up." But the miser refuses to extend his hand. The kind person is puzzled at first, but then suddenly realizes and shouts at the miser who is about to sink, "I'll give you my hand, grab onto me quickly." The miser immediately grabs onto the kind person's hand. Actually, this joke is a typical framing trap. Although the underlying meaning is the same, the different presentation frames can lead to different perceptions, causing people to think they are different. For example, consider these two sentences. The first one states that the survival rate within 1 month after surgery is 90%, while the second one states that the mortality rate within 1 month after surgery is 10%. Although they convey the same meaning, the former is more reassuring to people. This is because the framing trap includes a psychological phenomenon called loss aversion. It means that people find losses more unbearable when faced with the same amount of gains and losses. Therefore, in the framing trap, the wording that tends towards losses is more likely to be disliked by people. Okay, these are the 4 main intuitive traps: cognitive relaxation traps, automatic substitution traps, anchoring traps, and framing traps mentioned in this book. It is almost impossible to completely avoid intuitive errors caused by fast thinking, but when faced with significant matters, we should try our best to engage our system too for rational decision-making. Let's talk about the next question: how to make rational decisions. I have summarized 3 methods for you. The famous investor Charlie Munger has a viewpoint that happiness is simple to achieve, just know how to make yourself unhappy and then avoid it. Similarly, if we want to make rational decisions, the first method is to try to avoid the intuitive traps mentioned earlier. For example, to avoid the cognitive relaxation trap, we can make an effort to develop the habit of communicating, consulting, and adopting external opinions in decision-making, rather than relying solely on personal thoughts. For the cognitive substitution trap, we can imagine the disastrous outcome before taking action, and then carefully analyze the possible reasons for substitution. For the anchoring trap, before important negotiations, we can assume that all numbers have an anchoring effect on ourselves, consciously use System 2 to analyze and distinguish, and come up with the truly appropriate numbers. As for the framing trap, we can also make good use of the framing effect to create a more positive context. For example, if you have a big piece of good news and a small piece of bad news, you should share both pieces of news together. This way, the pain brought by the bad news will be diluted by the joy brought by the good news, and the negative effects will be minimized. Conversely, if you have a big piece of bad news and a small piece of good news, you should announce these 2 pieces of news separately. This way, the happiness brought by the good news will not be overwhelmed by the pain brought by the bad news. The second method to avoid irrational decision-making is to have a probabilistic mindset. As the name suggests, when making judgments, the decision should be based on the true probability of an event occurring, rather than relying on subjective imagination. This is not difficult to understand, but in practice, it is often challenging to achieve because it goes against intuition. For example, when hearing news about a plane crash, one might assume that trains are safer, but in reality, the probability of train accidents is higher. Therefore, for a rational decision based on safety considerations, one should still choose to take a plane. To cultivate one's probabilistic thinking, it is best to pay attention to the following 2 points. First, do not overly focus on rare events and be biased in listening and believing. It may be helpful to ask oneself, what is the actual probability of such events occurring? Second, do not overlook the phenomenon of mean reversion. Mean reversion refers to the tendency for things to return to their average level once they have deviated too much from it, whether it be in stock investments, weather changes, or sports performance. Therefore, we should not be overly optimistic or pessimistic based on 1 or 2 instances, but rather consider longer-term trends for judgment. Lastly, a method that helps us make rational decisions is to transform our psychological accounts into economic accounts. This method is particularly suitable for making rational economic decisions. Psychological accounts are the mental divisions we create in our minds, while economic accounts refer to the actual transactions that occur. For example, psychologists conducted an experiment where they asked volunteers if they would still attend a $200 concert if they lost $200 on their way there. Most people said they would still go. However, if the situation was changed to losing the concert ticket and then having to spend an additional $200 to buy a new one, would they still be willing to attend? The results showed that most people said they would not. However, upon careful consideration, the actual loss in both scenarios is $200. But people's initial reaction is that spending $400 for one concert seems unreasonable. By transforming our psychological accounts into economic accounts, we can make decisions based on cold, hard numbers rather than emotional attachments, allowing us to be more objective. For example, there is a person who chooses to take a taxi to work every day instead of buying a car. Most people would express their lack of understanding because we believe that taking a taxi every day is a luxurious expense. However, in reality, this person carefully calculated and compared the costs of taking a taxi and buying a car, and found that taking a taxi is actually more cost-effective, safer, and time-saving. This is because the expenses of parking fees, fuel costs, and maintenance fees add up to a significant amount. This decision is made based on rationality, taking into account the economic aspect. Alright, so far we have discussed 3 methods to avoid making irrational decisions. Understanding the operating principles of the brain not only helps us make rational decisions, but also enhances our life experiences. The author discovered that our evaluation of an experience is often influenced by the peak moment and the ending moment of that experience, which in turn affects our next decision. He refers to this phenomenon as the peak-end rule. To prove this point, Kahneman conducted a famous experiment called the cold hand experiment. He recruited several volunteers and asked them to immerse their hands in ice water for 3 rounds. The temperature of the ice water prepared for the volunteers was slightly painful but tolerable. In the first round, the volunteers were instructed to keep their hands in the ice water for 60 seconds before taking them out. In the second round, the volunteers were again asked to keep their hands in the ice water for 60 seconds, but when the time was up, the researchers said nothing and instead opened another valve, allowing warm water to flow into the container. This caused the water temperature to rise slightly and relieved the volunteers' pain to some extent. This process lasted for about 30 seconds. The third round was a repetition of one of the previous rounds, and the participants were allowed to choose which round to repeat. The results showed that 80% of the participants chose the second round. The 90-second experiment was chosen simply because they felt more comfortable during the final stage of the experiment. Many times, our perception of life is the same. Kahneman believes that we have 2 selves, one of which is called the remembering self. The remembering self tends to be more subjective, magnifying the typical parts of an event and distorting the truth. The counterpart to the remembering self is the experiencing self, which records our moment-to-moment feelings but cannot turn these feelings into long-term memories. Therefore, our decision-making relies heavily on the remembering self, thinking from the perspective of our memories. For example, if a movie has a disappointing ending, we might say it's a bad film and forget about the parts that amazed us. If a marriage ends in divorce, we might consider it a failure and overlook the happiness it once brought us. In terms of our entire life, we tend to focus more on the outcome and underestimate the process. So, in order to enhance our life experience, on one hand, within our capabilities, we should consciously create peak experiences for ourselves. For example, when traveling on a limited budget, we can allocate more budget for the last day, so that when we recall the vacation, we may feel a stronger sense of happiness. On the other hand, we should also be aware that we are often dominated by the remembering self. When we realize that certain things are not going well, we can activate the experiencing self and objectively review the little moments of beauty that have happened in the past, comforting ourselves in the present moment and making better choices for our future selves. Okay, the book we're discussing today is a psychology book written by Nobel laureate in economics, Daniel Kahneman. The entire book answers a core question: why are we always irrational? We divided it into 4 parts to provide an explanation. In the first part, we mainly discuss the 2 operations of the brain, System 1 and System 2, which are fast-thinking mode and slow-thinking mode. Compared to System 2, System 1 requires almost no mental effort, so it always takes control of the brain. However, it cannot make accurate analyses like System 2, which is the root cause of our irrational decision-making. In the second part, we elaborate on the 4 main intuitive traps caused by the operation of System 1, cognitive ease trap, substitution trap, anchoring trap, and framing trap. In the third part, we provide 3 methods for making rational decisions: avoiding traps rationally, developing probabilistic thinking, and transforming psychological accounts into economic accounts. In the final part, starting from the principles of brain operation, we explain how to use the peak-end effect to enhance our life experiences through experiential self-improvement. This is all the content for this issue. If you have listened to the content and want to delve deeper into the book, I recommend you read the entire book.